Strangers on the ranch road. The morning sun hung low, stretching long shadows across the dusty prairie. The wind carried a chill, dry and sharp, whispering through the tall grass like a mourner's hymn. On the wagon trail leading west, two figures trudged barefoot. One was a small girl, no older than 8, clutching the hand of her younger sister, who could barely keep up. Their dresses were thin and worn, the hems torn from too many miles of walking. Dust clung to their hair and faces, streaked with the dried remnants of tears. They had buried their father at dawn, with nothing more than a shallow grave beneath a lone cottonwood tree. There was no preacher, no coffin, no carved stone to mark his name, just the earth piled over him, and the weight of loss pressing down on their young shoulders. The older girl tried to be strong. She had braided her sister's hair with trembling hands, the way Mama used to, before Mama had died last winter. She told her sister they had to keep walking, because somewhere out there, someone would have to help them. But her voice cracked, betraying the truth. She didn't know where to go. By mid-morning, their legs ached, and their bellies growled with hunger. That was when the sound of hooves broke the silence of the plain. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, astride a tall bay horse. He wore a dust-stained duster coat, his hat pulled low, and a rifle hung in the saddle scabbard. He was a rancher, his posture straight but weary, his face shaded with a loneliness that seemed carved into the lines around his eyes. The girls froze, clutching each other's hands tighter. The rider slowed his horse, studying them carefully. He had seen many things in his years on the range: cattle rustlers, drifters, men broken by war or whiskey. But this sight struck him deeper than any gunfight ever could. Two little girls, alone on the trail, their eyes hollow from grief. He reined in close, voice rough from years of silence. "You too. Where's your folks?" The older girl looked up, chin trembling but brave. Her voice was a whisper, raspy from crying. "Our dad, he passed away today. We've got nowhere left to turn." The words pierced him like a bullet. For a long moment, he said nothing. The wind tugged at his coat, and the horse shifted uneasily beneath him. Memories stirred in his chest, memories of his own wife and son, taken by fever years ago, leaving him to wander the ranch house like a ghost. Since then, he had kept to himself, speaking little, living only for the cattle and the quiet. He leaned down, his voice softer this time, almost broken. "I see." The girls waited, eyes wide, afraid he might ride on and leave them as others had before. Instead, the rancher swung down from his horse. He crouched, eye level with the older girl, his rough hands hanging by his sides. He didn't touch her, he didn't know if she would flinch, but his gaze was steady, carrying a strength she hadn't seen since her father. "You got names?" he asked. The older girl lifted her chin. "I'm Clara. This is my sister, Ruthie." He nodded slowly. "Clara. Ruthie. I'm Jacob." Jacob. The name felt solid, like the earth under their bare feet. Clara swallowed, trying to be brave. "We don't got no food. No place to sleep. Just Daddy's Bible. I promised him I'd take care of Ruthie. But I don't know how." Her lip quivered, and she bit it hard to stop the sob. Something in Jacob's chest cracked open. The silence he had wrapped around himself all these years was breaking, splintering beneath the weight of two little girls' need. He whispered, almost to himself, but loud enough for Clara to hear. "You ain't alone no more." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Ruthie leaned against her, too tired to speak. Jacob straightened, running a calloused hand over his jaw. He glanced at the horizon, then back at them. He wasn't a man who invited people into his life. God knew his ranch had been nothing but empty rooms and quiet suppers for years. But he couldn't ride away. He wouldn't. "Come on," he said gruffly. "I'll get you to my ranch. Ain't much, but it's warm. There's food. You'll be safe there." Clara hesitated, torn between fear and hope. But the way Jacob spoke, steady, sure, without pity, made her believe him. She nodded slowly. He lifted Ruthie into the saddle first, then helped Clara up behind her. His horse shifted but obeyed, accustomed to Jacob's quiet authority. Jacob walked beside them, leading the reins. The miles passed in silence, except for the creak of leather and the rustle of prairie grass. Clara clutched her sister, whispering now and then to keep her calm. Jacob said little, but his presence was a wall between them and the empty world. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was sinking low. The spread was simple: a weathered house with a wide porch, a barn, corrals, and acres of grassland stretching beyond. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Jacob had kept the fire going before he left that morning. He helped the girls down, guiding them toward the porch. Their small feet dragged, but their eyes widened at the sight of a roof, a door, a promise of rest. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and coffee. It was tidy but bare, only one plate on the table, one chair worn smooth from years of use. Still, there was comfort in it, a sense of shelter. Jacob busied himself with supper, pulling beans and bread from the pantry. He didn't fuss, didn't hover, but Clara noticed how he placed the food gently in front of them, as if reminding them they were safe now. Ruthie ate quickly, hunger overpowering her grief. Clara ate more slowly, her eyes never leaving Jacob. She saw the loneliness in him, the way he avoided looking at the two empty chairs that once belonged to his family. She didn't understand everything, but she felt it, the same hollowness she carried. When the meal was done, Jacob showed them the spare room, a place he hadn't opened in years. Dust clung to the quilt, but it was clean enough, warm enough. He lit a lamp and set it by the bed. Clara tucked Ruthie in, humming softly until her sister's eyes closed. Then she turned, finding Jacob leaning against the doorframe, hat in his hands. "Why'd you stop for us?" she asked quietly. Jacob looked down at the hat, his voice low. "Because once, somebody should have stopped for me. But they didn't." Clara's heart ached at the weight in his words. He cleared his throat, standing straighter. "You girls rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure things out." As he turned to leave, Clara whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Jacob." He paused, hand on the doorframe. For the first time in years, a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Just Jacob," he said softly. And then he closed the door, leaving Clara to stare at the lamp's glow, clutching the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they had found a place to belong. A home found in silence. The next morning dawned with a gentle hush, the sky painted in pale rose and gold. Clara woke first, sitting up in the strange bed that smelled faintly of cedar and wood smoke. For a moment, confusion clouded her, then she remembered. Daddy was gone. Ruthie slept beside her, curled up tight, her tiny hand clutching the worn Bible. But the room around them wasn't the cold prairie floor. There were walls, a roof, and a quilt pulled over their shoulders. Clara slipped quietly from bed and tiptoed to the window. Beyond the glass, she saw Jacob in the yard, already at work. He moved with quiet purpose, feeding the horses, checking the fences, his hat tipped against the morning sun. He seemed carved from the same earth he worked, solid, silent, dependable. For the first time since yesterday, Clara felt a thread of safety tugging at her chest. The rancher's silence. Over the next days, the girls settled uneasily into Jacob's ranch. He didn't say much, just gave them tasks to keep busy, made sure they ate, and kept the fire lit at night. Clara washed dishes, though she had to stand on a stool to reach the basin. Ruthie followed Jacob like a shadow, watching him feed the chickens and stack wood. The little one rarely spoke, but she trusted him faster than Clara did. Clara still wondered each night if Jacob would tell them to leave come morning. Yet every day, he kept making room for them in quiet ways, setting out 2 extra plates, placing their shoes by the door, leaving a lantern in the hallway so they wouldn't fear the dark. It was Ruthie who broke his silence first. One evening, as Jacob sat on the porch sharpening his knife, Ruthie climbed into the chair beside him, her small legs swinging. She studied him for a long time before asking, "Do you get lonely out here?" Jacob paused mid-sharpen, his jaw tightening. He hadn't spoken of loneliness in years, not since burying his wife and boy. Finally, he set the knife down. "Sometimes," he said simply. Ruthie nodded, as if she understood more than a child should. "We do too." Something cracked open in Jacob then, though he didn't show it. He only reached over and handed her a whittled piece of wood, shaped like a horse. Ruthie's eyes lit, and she held it to her chest as though it were made of gold. Whispers in the town. Word spread quickly in town. A rancher who had lived alone for years had suddenly taken in 2 orphan girls. Some folks said it was kindness. Others whispered he'd only keep them until it became too much trouble. When Jacob rode into town for supplies, Clara sat stiff in the wagon seat beside him, hearing the whispers. A shopkeeper leaned over the counter and muttered, "Careful with strays, Jacob. They'll break your back before long." Jacob said nothing, only gathered the sugar and flour. But Clara noticed the way his hand tightened on the bag, the way his eyes hardened. On the ride home, Clara looked up at him. "Are we trouble?" she asked softly. Jacob turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze. "You're children. Children ain't trouble. They're a gift." Tears burned Clara's eyes. She pressed her lips together, but inside, her heart whispered the words she'd been afraid to believe. "He's not going to leave us." A warmth returning. As the weeks passed, the ranch began to change. Laughter returned to the halls, soft, uncertain at first, then stronger. Clara learned to bake bread with Jacob's flour, filling the kitchen with smells it hadn't known in years. Ruthie decorated the porch with wildflowers she picked by the creek. Jacob, for all his silence, found himself drawn into their small joys. He mended Clara's doll with careful stitches. He built Ruthie a swing from the old oak tree. And sometimes, late at night, he'd stand in the doorway of their room, watching them sleep. Something inside him, something he thought had died with his family, was slowly coming alive again. But there was still an emptiness in the picture. Clara felt it most at supper, when she'd glance at Jacob across the table. He never spoke of it, but she knew. He missed a woman's voice in that house. He missed companionship, not just the company of children. And then fate answered. A widow's arrival. It was on a gray afternoon when Jacob found her. A woman standing by the broken wheel of a wagon, her two hands gripping it in vain. She was slim but strong, her hair pulled back under a bonnet, her face lined with both beauty and hardship. Jacob pulled his horse to a halt. "You need help." The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were weary but steady. The wheel gave out. "My name's Sarah. I was heading west to find work. My husband—" She stopped, her throat tightening. "He died last winter." Jacob studied her a long moment. He saw the same hollow look he'd seen in Clara and Ruthie, the look of someone carrying too much grief alone. "Come with me," he said simply. By evening, Sarah sat at Jacob's table with the girls clinging to her skirts as if they'd always known her. Clara whispered to Ruthie that she looked like Mama had, only softer, gentler. Sarah stayed on, helping with the girls, cooking meals, mending clothes. Her laughter, quiet but warm, began to seep into Jacob's walls. He found himself listening for it, waiting for it. The choice. Spring rolled in with green fields and calves bawling in the pasture. The ranch was alive again, not with cattle alone but with family. Clara and Ruthie ran barefoot through the grass. Sarah's voice carried from the porch as she called them in. And Jacob finally felt something he thought he'd buried forever. Hope. But one evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, Sarah stood with him at the fence line. Her hands were folded, her eyes troubled. "Jacob," she said quietly, "I don't want to be a burden. You've already done more than most men would. If it's too much, say the word, and I'll take the girls and find work in town." The thought of them leaving, of silence filling the ranch again, struck Jacob harder than any wound. He turned to her, his face rough with emotion he rarely let show. "You think this place was alive before you came?" he whispered. "It wasn't. It was just me, and ghosts. You and the girls. You've given it back. You've given me back." Sarah's breath caught. The fading sunlight gilded the lines of his face, the raw honesty in his eyes. "You ain't leaving," Jacob said, his voice low but steady. He reached for her hand, rough fingers trembling as they closed around hers. "Not now. Not ever." Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks. She leaned into him, and for the first time in years, Jacob held someone close, not out of duty, but out of love. A family at last. That night, Clara and Ruthie peeked around the doorframe, giggling softly. Clara whispered to her sister, "See? I told you. He wasn't gonna let us go." Ruthie grinned, clutching her little wooden horse. "We got a home now." And they did. From that day on, Jacob's ranch was no longer a place of silence and sorrow. It was filled with children's laughter, with Sarah's gentle voice, with the warmth of suppers shared and prayers whispered before bed. He had been a lonely rancher, living among ghosts. But now, when the little girl's words echoed in his memory, "Our dad passed away today, we've got nowhere left to turn," he knew what his whisper had meant. It hadn't just been a promise to two orphaned girls. It was the whisper of a man who had found his family again. And this time, he would never let go.